decision to get higher education. And next week, Michelle and I will bring together college presidents and nonprofits to lead a campaign to help more low-income students attend and succeed in college. But while higher education may be the surest path to the middle class, it's not the only one. So we should offer our people the best technical education in the world. That's why we've worked to connect local businesses with community colleges so that workers, young and old, can earn the new skills that earn them more money. And I've also embraced an idea that I know all of you at the Center for American Progress have championed. And by the way, Republican governors in a couple of states have championed. And that's making high-quality preschool available to every child in America. We know that kids in these programs grow up likelier to get more education, earn higher wages, form more stable families of their own. It starts a virtuous cycle, not a vicious one. And we should invest in that. We should give all of our children that chance. And as we empower our young people for future success, the third part of this middle-class economics is empowering our workers. It's time to ensure our collective bargaining laws function as they're supposed to, so unions have a level playing field to organize for a better deal for workers and better wages for the middle class. It's time to pass the Paycheck Fairness Act so that women will have more tools to fight pay discrimination. It's time to pass the Employment Non-Discrimination Act so workers can't be fired for who they are or who they love. And even though we're bringing manufacturing jobs back to America, we're creating more good-paying jobs in education and healthcare and business services, we know that we're going to have a greater and greater portion of our people in the service sector. And we know that there are airport workers and fast food workers and nurse assistants and retail salespeople who work their tails off and are still living at or barely above poverty. And that's why it's well past the time to raise a minimum wage that in real terms right now is below where it was when Harry Truman was in office. This shouldn't be an ideological question. You know, it was Adam Smith, the father of free market economics, who once said, "They who feed, clothe, and lodge the whole body of the people should have such a share of the produce of their own labor as to be themselves tolerably well fed, clothed, and lodged." And for those of you who don't speak Old English, let me translate. It means if you work hard, you should make a decent living. If you work hard, you should be able to support a family. Now, we all know the arguments that have been used against a higher minimum wage. Some say it actually hurts low-wage workers. Business will be less likely to hire them. There's no solid evidence that a higher minimum wage costs jobs, and research shows it raises incomes for low-wage workers and boosts short-term economic growth. Others argue that if we raise the minimum wage, companies will just pass those costs on to consumers. But a growing chorus of businesses, small and large, argue differently. You know, already there are extraordinary companies in America that provide decent wages, salaries and benefits, and training for their workers, and deliver a great product to consumers. Now, SAS in North Carolina offers child care and sick leave. REI, a company my Secretary of Interior used to run, offers retirement plans and strives to cultivate a good work balance. There are companies out there that do right by their workers. They recognize that paying a decent wage actually helps their bottom line, reduces turnover, means workers have more money to spend, to save, maybe eventually start a business of their own. A broad majority of Americans agree we should raise the minimum wage. That's why last month voters in New Jersey decided to become the 20th state to raise theirs even higher. That's why yesterday the D.C. Council voted to do it too. I agree with those voters. I agree with those voters, and I'm going to keep pushing until we get a higher minimum wage for hard-working Americans across the entire country. It will be good for our economy. It will be good for our families. Number 4, as I alluded to earlier, we still need targeted programs for the communities and workers that have been hit hardest by economic change and the Great Recession. These communities are no longer limited to the inner city. They're found in neighborhoods hammered by the housing crisis, manufacturing towns hit hard by years of plants packing up, landlocked rural areas where young folks oftentimes feel like they've got to leave just to find a job. They're communities that just aren't generating enough jobs anymore. So we've put forward new plans to help these communities and their residents, because we've watched cities like Pittsburgh or my hometown of Chicago revamp themselves. And if we give more cities the tools to do it, not handouts, but a hand up, cities like Detroit can do it too. So in a few weeks, we'll announce the first of these promise zones, urban and rural communities where we're going to support local efforts focused on a national goal, and that is a child's course in life should not be determined by the zip code he's born in, but by the strength of his work ethic and the scope of his dreams. And we're also going to do more for the long-term unemployed. You know, for people who've been out of work for more than 6 months, often through no fault of their own, life is a catch-22. Companies won't give their resume an honest look because they've been laid off so long. But they've been laid off so long because companies won't give their resume an honest look. And that's why earlier this year I challenged CEOs from some of America's best companies to give these Americans a fair shot. And next month, many of them will join us at the White House for an announcement about this. 5th, we've got to revamp retirement to protect Americans in their golden years, to make sure another housing collapse doesn't steal the savings in their homes. We've also got to strengthen our safety net for a new age, so it doesn't just protect people who hit a run of bad luck from falling into poverty, but also propels them back out of poverty. Today, nearly half of full-time workers and 80% of part-time workers don't have a pension or retirement account at their job. About half of all households don't have any retirement savings. So we're going to have to do more to encourage private savings and shore up the promise of Social Security for future generations. And remember, these are promises we make to one another. We don't do it to replace the free market, but we do it to reduce risk in our society by giving people the ability to take a chance and catch them if they fall. One study shows that more than half of Americans will experience poverty at some point during their adult lives. Think about that. This is not an isolated situation. More than half of Americans at some point in their lives will experience poverty. That's why we have nutrition assistance, or the program known as SNAP, because it makes a difference for a mother who's working, but is just having a hard time putting food on the table for her kids. That's why we have unemployment insurance, because it makes a difference for a father who lost his job and is out there looking for a new one, that he can keep a roof over his kids' heads. By the way, Christmas time is no time for Congress to tell more than 1 million of these Americans that they have lost their unemployment insurance, which is what will happen if Congress does not act before they leave on their holiday vacation. The point is, these programs are not typically hammocks for people to just lie back and relax. These programs are almost always temporary means for hard-working people to stay afloat while they try to find a new job or going to school to retrain themselves for the jobs that are out there, or sometimes just to cope with a bout of bad luck. Now, progressives should be open to reforms that actually strengthen these programs and make them more responsive to a 21st century economy. For example, we should be willing to look at fresh ideas to revamp unemployment and disability programs, to encourage faster and higher rates of reemployment without cutting benefits. We shouldn't weaken fundamental protections built over generations, because given the constant churn in today's economy and the disabilities that many of our friends and neighbors live with, they're needed more than ever. We should strengthen them and adapt them to new circumstances so they work even better. But understand that these programs of social insurance benefit all of us, because we don't know when we might have a run of bad luck. We don't know when we might lose a job. Of course, for decades, there was one yawning gap in the safety net that did more than anything else to expose working families to the insecurities of today's economy, namely our broken health care system. That's why we fought for the Affordable Care Act, because 14,000 Americans lost their health insurance every single day. And even more died each year because they didn't have health insurance at all. We did it because millions of families who thought they had coverage were driven into bankruptcy by out-of-pocket costs that they didn't realize would be there. Tens of millions of our fellow citizens couldn't get any coverage at all. And Dr. King once said, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane. Well, not anymore. Because in the 3 years since we passed this law, the share of Americans with insurance is up. The growth of healthcare costs are down to the slowest rate in 50 years. More people have insurance, and more have new benefits and protections. 100 million Americans who've gained the right for free preventive care like mammograms and contraception. The more than 7 million Americans who've saved an average of $1,200 on their prescription medicine. Every American who won't go broke when they get sick because their insurance can't limit their care anymore. More people without insurance have gained insurance, more than 3 million young Americans who've been able to stay on their parents' plan. The more than 500,000 Americans and counting who are poised to get coverage starting on January 1st, some for the very first time. And it is these numbers, not the ones in any poll, that will ultimately determine the fate of this law. It's the measurable outcomes and reduced bankruptcies and reduced hours that have been lost because somebody couldn't make it to work, and healthier kids with better performance in schools, and young entrepreneurs who have the freedom to go out there and try a new idea. Those are the things that will ultimately reduce a major source of inequality and help ensure more Americans get the start that they need to succeed in the future. I've acknowledged more than once that we didn't roll out parts of this law as well as we should have, but the law's already working in major ways that benefit millions of Americans right now, even as we've begun to slow the rise in health care costs, which is good for family budgets, good for federal and state budgets, and good for the budgets of businesses, small and large. So this law is going to work, and for the sake of our economic security, it needs to work. And as people in states as different as California and Kentucky sign up every single day for health insurance, signing up in droves, they're proving they want that economic security. You know, if the Senate Republican leader still thinks he's going to be able to repeal this someday, he might want to check with the more than 60,000 people in his home state who are already set to finally have coverage that frees them from the fear of financial ruin and lets them afford to take their kids to see a doctor. So let me end by addressing the elephant in the room here, which is the seeming inability to get anything done in Washington these days. I realize we are not going to resolve all of our political debates over the best ways to reduce inequality and increase upward mobility this year or next year or in the next 5 years. But it is important that we have a serious debate about these issues. For the longer that current trends are allowed to continue, the more it will feed the cynicism and fear that many Americans are feeling right now, that they'll never be able to repay the debt they took on to go to college. They'll never be able to save enough to retire. They'll never see their own children land a good job that supports a family. And that's why, even as I will keep on offering my own ideas for expanding opportunity, I'll also keep challenging and welcoming those who oppose my ideas to offer their own. If Republicans have concrete plans that will actually reduce inequality, build the middle class, provide more ladders of opportunity to the poor, let's hear them. I want to know what they are. If you don't think we should raise the minimum wage, let's hear your idea to increase people's earnings. If you don't think every child should have access to preschool, tell us what you do differently to give them a better shot. If you still don't like Obamacare, and I know you don't, even though it's built on market-based ideas of choice and competition in the private sector, then you should explain how exactly you'd cut costs and cover more people and make insurance more secure. You owe it to the American people to tell us what you are for, not just what you're against. That way we can have a vigorous and meaningful debate. That's what the American people deserve. That's what the times demand. It's not enough anymore to just say we should get our government out of the way and let the unfettered market take care of it. For our experience tells us that's just not true. Look, I've never believed that government can solve every problem, or should, and neither do you. We know that ultimately our strength is grounded in our people. Individuals out there striving, working, making things happen. It depends on community, a rich and generous sense of community. That's at the core of what happens at the Arc here every day. You understand that turning back rising inequality and expanding opportunity requires parents taking responsibility for their kids, kids taking responsibility to work hard. It requires religious leaders who mobilize their congregations to rebuild neighborhoods block by block. It requires civic organizations that can help train the unemployed, link them with businesses for the jobs of the future. It requires companies and CEOs to set an example by providing decent wages and salaries and benefits for their workers, and a shot for somebody who's down on his or her luck. You know, we know that's our strength, our people, our communities, our businesses. But government can't stand on the sidelines in our efforts, because government is us. It can and should reflect our deepest values and commitments. And if we refocus our energies on building an economy that grows for everybody and gives every child in this country a fair chance of success, then I remain confident that the future still looks brighter than the past, and that the best days for this country we love are still ahead. Thank you, everybody. God bless you. God bless America.